I'm an open book, man. Anything you want to throw at me, I'm ready to go. So this passive idea of like, I'm going to play my hands as bluff catchers when the environment itself is just not bluffing very often leads to a lot of lost value and a lot of mistakes. I was degenerate because I was arrogant. I didn't know any better. When you start to ignore those things and you only think about the game as hand versus hand, you become ignorant to the variance. The biggest issue that everybody at this game has, from amateur all the way to pro, is a lack of purpose.
Well, greetings everybody. Welcome to the Rec Poker Podcast, officially sponsored by Running Aces Casino and Racetrack. I'm your host, Steve Fredland, and that voice that you heard in the intro was professional poker player Matt Berkey. It was my great honor to chat with Matt for quite a while about a lot of interesting things, a lot of poker-related stuff, some non-poker-related things, and I just had a great respect for him and how he thinks about the game and how he thinks about life, and I think you're going to enjoy this interview. It was long enough that I actually decided to break it down into two parts. So you'll hear part one this week, and you'll hear part two next week. A couple of quick announcements before we get into the conversation with Matt. Thanks again to everybody who's wearing the patches. I've been sending out a lot out the door, dropping them off with people, mailing them to people. It's fun to see more and more pictures coming through on Twitter and Facebook of people wearing those. Also, it was interesting, I just had a good conversation with a gentleman named Justin Cole at the University of Colorado, and he was in town, and I had a chance to play poker with him, and he's running a poker class, teaching university students about poker, and it was super fascinating. Had a chance to sit next to him and play with him for quite a while and pick his brain. So I gave him some patches, but I'm excited to kind of see where that goes. I want to continue the conversation with him and see how we can support what they're doing and learn from what they're doing. Just fantastic stuff. So thanks to Justin for engaging with me that way, and thanks to everybody else who's wearing the patches. I want to give a quick shout out to Running Aces. We'll run a quick commercial, and then right after that, we'll get into the interview with Matt Berkey. Running Aces Casino and Racetrack has the best poker room in Minnesota, featuring 24/7 promos on all cash poker games, including earning $2 per hour in comps, plus the most player-friendly tourney structures. Visit runaces.com for daily promotions and the tournament calendar. Running Aces Casino and Racetrack, the official sponsor of Rec Poker. All right, everybody. Well, as I mentioned, I'm here with poker pro Matt Berkey, Sulphur Y Academy. Matt, first of all, man, just thanks for taking the time to be with us.
No, I appreciate you guys having me on here.
Yeah, and you're out in Vegas by way of Pittsburgh.
Yeah, Vegas was a place that I got taken to kicking and screaming. I was the last of my group that was willing to make the move. I fought tooth and nail to try to talk everybody out of it.
What do you mean the last of your groups? You had a sort of a poker playing posse there that all moved out, or?
Yeah, so in 2008, January 2008, myself and four of my good friends all decided to take the leap and move out here. So it was me, the other person that you may have heard of is Brent Hanks, and then three of my high school college buddies, Greg Aversa, Brian LaManna, and Brandon Garrity. And then Phil Collins, USC Phildo, crashed on our couch for probably the first year and a half.
Okay. And you've been out there ever since, and you're sort of loving it out there, or at least that's where the action's at that you're looking for?
Yeah, I actually just built a house. I can't believe it. I still refer to myself as, Pittsburgh being home when people ask me, like when people say, like, are you going home in reference to like my travels or whatever, I always say, no, I'm going back to Vegas. And I genuinely mean it. Like home to me is Pittsburgh, but I have more roots here now than I would have ever imagined. Yeah, it's hard to believe. I suppose that at some point that's just going to change. Vegas will be considered home. I don't know, man. I honestly don't know. If I ever have a family and kids, there's no way I would stay here permanently. I would almost certainly have at least a part-time residence back in Pittsburgh.
Okay. Just too hard to be a poker pro, though, and live outside of Vegas?
I just, there's a lot about this place that's amazing, but I just wouldn't want to, expose a kid to being raised here. Yeah. I haven't met too many fundamentally normal Vegas people. There's a handful, don't get me wrong.
Right.
My personal trainer is actually one of the most intelligent people I know, and he's born and raised here. But generally speaking, it's a tough environment to grow up in. But where else am I going to play the big game?
Right. Well, if you don't mind, if you could go through person by person and let us know who are fundamentally psychologically sane and who are not, That'd be fantastic.
Sure. I mean, honestly, that is like something that I consider, and maybe arrogantly so, but I feel like I'm actually really good at, I don't want to use the term reading people because it sounds so like bullshitty, but I feel like I have a good grasp of like who people are through conversation, through interactions, and really through playing this game.
Yeah. So how did you get started in poker? So, was that sort of always been part of your life? Were you raised playing cards, or how'd you get into this game in the first place in Pittsburgh?
It was nothing like that. I grew up really poor, so the idea of gambling wasn't really ever in the forefront of my mind. But my close friend Brian Lamanna that I spoke of that moved out here with me, he kind of introduced me to it, and as I started to like cut grass for money and things like that in the summertime, we had a little bit to kick around, and 5 or 6 of us would sit around, would play like penny ante games, quarter ante games, things like that. Mostly all stud variations, replace the pot type games, and it was fun, and I was naturally good at it. I don't know why. I don't know if it was a natural risk aversion or a lack of risk aversion, versus their more conservative natures or whatever, but I was a very consistent winner and don't really know what to point to from there. So it piqued my interest. Hold'em kind of like came into our vision when Rounders was released in '98. And we played a weird version of it where you just anteed and everybody saw the flop. Just because we were so used to playing studs,
right?
Like stud variations, that it didn't really make sense, the idea of blinds. And then when I got into college, I've never drank in my life, and I played college baseball, so that was obviously oil and vinegar.
Yeah.
And it was tough. It was freshman year. It's not easy being the kid who's already getting kind of harassed by the upperclassmen and saying like, yeah, by the way, I'm not going to drink till I get sick. It's just, it's not my thing. But they were actually pretty forgiving and kind of a lot more respectful about it whenever, I just kind of divulged like who I was, why I didn't drink, what my ambitions were. And, the fact that I played cards, like it bridged a gap really quickly with the upperclassmen. They liked that I would gamble with them, and it was a nice social lubricant.
So what did you end up going to school for?
I majored in computer science.
Okay. Did you graduate then with a degree, or?
I did. I have a bachelor's in computer science, and I think I'm like 3 credits shy of having a minor in math.
Okay, that's right. Nice. So we're very similar that way. I'm a math major myself, and dabble a bit in computer science. So I get that whole framework, and sometimes that's an interesting approach to poker. Do you find yourself kind of bringing more of an analytical, mathematical approach versus some folks would, maybe focus more on the psychological side of it? Or
it's weird, right? So like you're familiar with computer science, so you understand the difference between like the person who writes the algorithm versus the programmer.
Right.
And I was always the algorithm writer.
Okay.
Like, that's the part I enjoyed. I loathe the programming aspect.
You're the architect.
Yeah. I don't care enough about the small details. So like I'm very much abstract in my thinking. I'm just competent at linear thought.
Nice.
So it's like, for me, it's the opposite with poker. Like this whole new wave of GTO and modeling and trying to create a systematic approach to the game, it's painful to me. It's like I grew up with that whole concept of limit poker is a science and no limit poker is an art, and that's what gravitated me towards it. It's like you just have the ability to do whatever you want whenever you want, and sometimes it's just a sheer battle of will, and like that really spoke to the athlete in me, where it was like, okay, I just need to be able to outwit these people. Right. And it doesn't matter what path I take to do so. And now that, the game's kind of shifting a little bit. So there's a give and take. Specifically what we're working on at Solve for Why is trying to marry the two. And we're steering really hard into the actual environmental elements, the psychological aspect, and trying to figure out a way that we can quantify it a little bit better so that, we can give a rhyme or reason to the people who kind of like at this moment are just field players.
And I think that's so critical. I mean, I don't know if you've ever done the Myers-Briggs, but I'm an INTP, which basically means that I'm looking for that broad framework. Give me the concepts, give me the hook to hang things on. And I think that sounds like kind of what you're talking about. And we talked to a lot of recreational players, and we talk about specific hand situations, and we'll get guidance from some of the pros that'll say, "Well, do this in this situation," and that's all well and good. But I think at the end of the day, what we're looking for is give me the overall concept, because I'm not going to always be able to remember what I'm supposed to do with pocket fours under the gun with facing a 3-bet. I mean, so what are the concepts? What are those things that we can hang on to and kind of incorporate into our game? And that's what it sounds like. Maybe you're marrying that with the psychology within Solve for Why.
Well, a lot of the issue that we found, and the reason why we came to be, is because we thought there was a big sore spot in the market. The barrier of entry of learning right now is just so great that if I were a recreational player who enjoyed the game of poker, I'd be very turned off once I did a quick Google search. It's so daunting. It feels like you need some sort of like high level math guru or an engineer in order to figure this stuff out. And it's not that way. The game is really beautifully simple. So like what we're trying to figure out is why everybody's buying into this bullshitty micro learning process that everyone's being fed, right?
The idea. What do you mean by micro learning? Then that's
so like the idea of studying strictly hand histories and knowing what you're supposed to do with pocket fours under the gun.
Right.
What does that matter if you don't have a larger framework? If you don't have a big picture, more abstract approach of understanding like how pocket fours interchanges with 5-6 suited, which interchanges now with your suited aces, and basically like the whole idea of not needing to know what to do with a specific hand, but instead having a purpose or an objective that you want to accomplish with all hands.
That's so good, man. I'm excited now. Where do I sign up? Let's go, and we'll just we'll get into some more stuff, but real quickly, the Solve for Why Academy. Where do people get more information on that? We'll kind of revisit this at the end, but
sure.
We've teased it a little bit. So if people are already listening to this and kind of want to Google a little bit, where do they find info while they're listening to it?
It's just solveforwhyacademy.com. And we're working on a lot of expansion. So we're actually going to be launching a subscription service next month, where we'll be doing a lot of, this, I guess, melding between the systematic modeling versus like the more feel approach and quantifying that a little bit. And then we also have a live academy where people come for 3 days. They learn from us. We run them through a workshop where they just listen to theory talk for a portion of the day. Then they get to play for 3 hours on an RFID table. All hole cards are revealed while Christian and I are in the back room kind of giving our analysis as to what they're doing well, what they could do better. Things along those lines.
Yeah, I was looking at some of that online, and I was just drooling over how valuable that would be as a player to actually play the way you play and have that real-time analysis. Yeah,
it's fun. One of the big things, and it's for everybody. That's the thing that I think that kind of gets lost. We miss out on a lot of the high-level players because of pride, and nobody really wants the help, I guess. Because the teaching market right now is so bullshitty. It's so much of, you're having problems with jacks? Let me tell you how to play it better. Here's an article.
Right.
And the same goes for like the low level players. It's like, well, if you're open to the feedback and criticism and just go in and understand like everybody in this game makes mistakes from top to bottom, then you can derive a lot of value from just being told like, hey, maybe instead of doing this, you should try to obtain this objective instead. So let's just shift your focus of what your goal is. And now all of a sudden, all these hands might become a lot easier to play.
That's so good. I think I found that too, as I've talked to a number of players that are trying to get better. I think one of the biggest barriers to improvement is not having a humble posture toward your own game. Just sort of assuming I know what I'm doing. I don't need the help. I just need to get more lucky or something.
Yeah, I mean,
it's a posture that says, I need help. Help me out here.
It's that old adage of like, poker's like sex. Everyone thinks they're the best, but the majority of people actually suck. And it makes sense, right? Like, how ludicrous to think that we're just born with the ability to solve these complex problems,
right? Naturally,
right? The reason why everybody was able to derive that they're talented in either elements, I guess, is due to lack of comparison, right? Mm-hmm. You only need to be outwitting the next opponent And when the game first popularized in 2003, outwitting the next opponent just meant being the smartest guy in the room,
Right.
or the least dumbest, I guess. Really, right? Because the rankings weren't that tough. I mean, everybody was just pretty much playing by the rules. Bluffing was a non-element. Nobody had any clue what was going on. We're a lot further along now. I mean, there's artificial simulations that are just the thing is like, that sounds scary, but really all they're doing is showing a peek into the window of how vast this game is and how far away it actually is from being solved. So I think like a lot of the elite community is driving fear into the rest of the poker world, that the game is on the verge of death, and these machines are going to make it rendered useless to try to play ever again. But you're still battling other people.
Exactly.
So it's still just a matter of outwitting your next opponent.
Totally agree. So if you kind of look back at your life now in Pittsburgh, and you kind of got into the game a little bit, obviously it's a long way from cutting grass and playing some nickel games to
Sure.
Solve for Y Academy and training all these people. So I'm curious a little bit about the journey along the way. Like at what point did you have a big score? Did you have something that sort of transitioned you to say, well, maybe I can do this more as a career? Did you ever take on sort of a regular job, quote unquote, after school, or did you go right into poker? Kind of give me a little flavor for
Sure.
How did you move from, maybe I'm good at this nickel dime game to this could actually be something I do?
Sure. I never even interned. I never wanted to be a computer scientist. I got into it because I had an aptitude for math, and it was a popular career field in 2000. There was a big need. So my advisor was just like, you should do this. You'll be good at it and you'll get paid a lot. And it was like, okay, I mean,
Yep.
I'm going to play professional baseball, so I don't care what I major in. And that was really my focus. I just wanted to play ball more than anything else on earth.
And where did you go to school for ball?
I started at Allegheny College in Meadville, Pennsylvania, which is a small D3 school.
Yep.
Much more regarded for their academics than their athletics. And I actually got cut after my freshman season. So I took a red shirt for that year, transferred up to the North 79, went to Erie, PA, to Gannon University, which was D2, and ended up starting for 4 seasons.
Sweet. Okay, cool.
But yeah, anyway, back to the poker thing. By the time I was a junior, I was just making money regularly at it. And I stopped going to class somewhere middle of the way through my sophomore year, really even before poker became an issue. I just kind of understood the value of time, and that especially with like computer science and things like that, this can all be pretty self-taught. So I used my professors as more of mentors than I did as day-to-day instructors. And I would just show up first day of class and say, like, listen, I'm very busy trying to make it as a baseball player. I'm spending 8 to 10 hours a day in the gym. Like, this is my most important thing in life. And I know you don't want to hear that, but I'm not going to come to your class. I'm going to do all the assignments. I'm going to show up for midterms and finals. If you feel the need to dock me for abusing your attendance policy, so be it. But if you feel like I'm performing, please don't take that 10% off my grade. And it all started with them giving me some sort of threat of like how I'm ruining my college life, yada yada yada. And then I would just go spend a little bit of time at their office hours once a week or so, make sure that I was all caught up. And I ended up graduating with like a 3.2. And
Nice.
That's nothing to brag about. I could have done far better. I just didn't care. And the whole reason I'm setting that up is because that's pretty much what frames out poker. When that was introduced to me my junior year, now all of a sudden I saw an immediate means to ends where I can make like enough money to get by in the short term so that I can continue to pursue my baseball career. And that's what I did for the first 18 months or so after graduation. I would just travel the Midwest, go to these tryouts, and play like 510 at like Greektown in Detroit or Turning Stone, New York, whatever. And it all culminated with my first tournament score at Turning Stone. I chopped an event for $15K. A few weeks later, I ended up getting second back-to-back nights in the Party Poker Nightly, and suddenly I had a $60,000 bankroll.
Yeah.
So
And
it
that
was
sort of
like,
just set you up, said, all right, this is what I'm doing, and I'm pretty convinced.
yeah, it was just like kind of the dominoes fell. That happened, and I went to a handful more tryouts, and it was the same process every single time. Make it to the final rounds, only for them to tell me, you don't throw hard enough. You're too old. At the time, I'm like 22, 23.
Right. Ancient.
Yeah, and everybody else, I mean, baseball years, that's like, you're past your prime. And everybody else is like 18 to 21. It's like, well, you're only throwing like low 80s. You're only 6 foot tall. We like your build. You're short, you're stocky, you have huge legs, but I just don't see you progressing any further. Like, sorry, we can't sign you. And after enough of those no's with, multi-$1,000 paycheck waiting for me at the casino, it's like, I guess this is it now.
How tough was that for you to kind of finally say it's just not going to happen?
The irony is that like my self-sabotage in the moment kind of allowed me to transition out of need. So I took that 60,000 and ended up sitting with it at like, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 tables of 2550 PLO, which I wasn't even good at the time. It just all started with like, I didn't know how to manage money or business. I had never seen more than like a few $1,000s in my life.
Right.
And then all of a sudden I have piles of it. So one night I was just playing like 2-4 heads up PLO, which I was pretty good at back in the day. And I was stuck. So I jumped up to 510, then 1020. And then I couldn't get heads up action any bigger than that. So suddenly I'm playing like full ring 2550, adding a table. Next thing I know, I dust off like 45,000 of it. And once I ran all the accounts dry, I like hit sheer panic. I felt like, I could have done so much with that money, and I just like degened it off. So I immediately sent $5,000 towards my student loans, leaving myself with like only 10K. And now it's just like, what have I done? This is madness. And throughout that whole process, I'd already signed up to be a part of an Arizona Winter League in Yuma, Arizona. So it was like my last ditch Hail Mary to go to this Winter League where like 100 ball players would be competing for like 15 or 20 contracts in various independent leagues. I go out there, have a great time. I do really well, but I'm semi-injured. And same thing happened. I came down to like the final 25 for the cuts, and I was one of the 5 who didn't get signed. But in that process, there was a casino on the border of Yuma, Arizona and California. And they just introduced No Limit. And they ran their very first, it was called Paradise Casino. They ran their very first No Limit tournament ever, January 29th, 2007, which happened to be my birthday. Which also happened to be the only weekend, the entire 45 days I was down there, that we had off. And so I go, it's a $500 buy-in, $500 add-on. And you can add on either immediately or at the end of the registration. So I just take it immediately. And I go coast to coast. I just chip lead this event from start to finish. It was 100 people. I won it without any effort. And the beauty of it was a guaranteed 20K to first place.
Oh.
They didn't guarantee the prize pool. They guaranteed first place. So it ends up only being like a 40 or 50K prize pool.
20X on your,
and almost half of it goes to first place. So suddenly, I'm back in the black and I have functional money again. Baseball clearly just isn't going to work out. And by the end of that summer, I had just like made the transition full time into poker.
So what do you think the keys are to that? I mean, what do you think other than just sort of naturally being good at poker, just kind of getting it? Obviously you had success early. You seemed like you went up and down a little bit, and then you had success again. But can you look back and say, man, here is why it worked for me to be able to sort of jump into this as a career right away? This is what I did well, or what can you sort of rationally think about what are those things? What were the keys for your success early?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's obviously going to be a lot different than what people are going to be able to accomplish now, just because the environments were so different. Like I said, you just need to be the smartest guy in the room. But I think I've always had this kind of predisposition to having a disregard for money. And in that example I gave, it demonstrates like a little bit of the degeneracy whenever you're ignorant, right? I wasn't a degenerate because I had a gambling problem. Like I've never really bet sports. I've never fired off in the pit. That's never been a thing. I was degenerate because I was arrogant. I didn't know any better. I literally thought that well, if I'm the smartest guy in my local card room, then I'm also the smartest guy who plays online at any stake. And it's just a barrier of money. So I have money now, so let's go. And, I didn't understand variance at all. I didn't understand how the inner workings of this game really matter. So eventually, like, I learned, and I learned the hard way. But now I think you can learn like the easy way. You can study these kinds of things, and it's not a means of trying to emulate a bot or anything like that. It's just more so understanding how equities work, and what a range is, and how it intertwines with an opponent's range. Because when you start to ignore those things and you only think about the game as hand versus hand, you become ignorant to the variance, and you become arrogant to the fact that we think we can control those types of things. Variance is actually fixed. People think it's variable, but it's very fixed in this game. It's predetermined, really, in the sense that most people are going to adhere to certain, I guess, like qualifiers as to like the hands that they're going to play and how they're going to play them. The volatility is what we actually have a lot more control over. You can play a lot less volatile of a style if you just choose to be pretty risk averse and play passively and things like that. You won't ever risk much, but you won't ever win much either.
Right.
So I think for people getting into the game now, it's just really getting over that first hump of learning. Once you're able to kind of understand this game the same way that you would understand like any high risk business, be it day trading or investing or basically anything. If you understand this game from the vantage point of like a startup, like let's pretend it's a lemonade stand, and you need to know what your material goods are, you need to know what your customer base is, what the price is, et cetera, et cetera. If you can start to correlate that over to poker, price being bets, customers being opponents, things along those lines, when you can start to think differently about the game, it becomes a lot easier to then become a winner, I guess.
So how would you recommend, because there's a lot of players out there, and this is really good. I think it's really about taking the micro and making it macro and saying, okay, how does this all fit together? Where do we hang these hooks? So there's a lot of players that I've encountered that some are brand new and some have been playing for many years. And they would say, I just really don't know how to start building a strategy. Like,
right.
I just played for fun and now I want to be more serious, but I'm still, because of how I learned the game, I'm just kind of playing my hand against their plan. And I know there's more range versus range. I know there's more strategic things I should be thinking about, but I don't really know how do I sort of, deconstruct my current game and reconstruct a brand new game with a better framework. I mean, what advice would you give to those folks that are saying, I just need to kind of recreate my game?
So that's the challenge, because I don't have a great answer for that. That's why I created Solve for Why. When I was, getting to the point of, because I was just a randomizer too. I was just a field player. I felt more qualified than the next guy to look my opponent in the face and say like, you didn't do it this time, and then make the correct decision. And that worked for a really long time until the general population stopped just randomizing themselves and they started to construct more strategy. And most of them are constructing incorrectly, right? They're just doing like what you just spoke to. They're putting a bunch of band-aids together and calling it a strategy, where they have a better idea of what to do with jacks in a single raise pot now. And with enough of that, the most intelligent of them will accidentally fall into a strategy construction. But it's like, when we developed Solve for Why, it was exactly that. It's like, what do you do if you don't know where to begin and there is no real entry point? It's like, well, I guess we're just going to have to create one, because it's not that there isn't any great tool. Like, in my opinion, something like Run It Once, watching those videos, it's fantastic if you already know what you're doing and know what to look for, right? Because now you can weed through all the bullshit and you could say like, oh, this coach is really good at playing, but he's not necessarily the best coach out there because all he's doing is telling me his thought process, and that's not helpful. Versus like Galfond, who can show me start to finish how he arrived at every single decision. That seeing that process will now help me develop a process, right? I think it just begins with being able to sit down and honestly set out what your objective is. So what you actually hope to accomplish both in the short term and the long term. And then, begin by trying to find these big picture real world examples that you're familiar with that you can try to parallel over to poker. Like I said, starting a business is a great approach. I think that helps like reframe exactly what you're supposed to be doing anytime you sit at the table and are dealt two cards.
Yeah.
But to your point, there aren't really any great next steps. I think you have to ask for help. You have to seek help, and finding proper outlets to do so, even if it's just a good forum where you can bounce ideas off of other people that you respect, that you consider peers. I think that's like a really great starting point.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think anytime that can involve, whether it's your peers or a formal study, but just maybe this is where solve for why it comes from, but just this idea of really knowing what you're trying to accomplish, really starting with the end in mind. And I do think people fail to do that. The end in mind is I want to win this hand.
Right.
Versus, I want to win this tournament, or I want to have the highest ROI, or whatever it is. And I think people really struggle with that question. I actually recently just spoke to a network of educators. I don't work in education, but I spoke to them about this too, about you really need to know what are you actually trying to do, because it's so easy to get lost in the day-to-day decisions of what you're trying to do, or this specific hand or this specific scenario. And I think, being able to keep the end in mind to say, well, ultimately, what are we trying to accomplish here is something that's very difficult for people to do. So I think whatever you're talking about as far as being able to build a strategy, build a concept, you've got to start with the end in mind. Yeah,
I parallel it to weight training a lot, where it's very easy to show up in the gym with a ton of motivation and saying like, that's it. This is the day that I begin. This is where the transformation starts. And then you walk into the gym and you're just so overwhelmed by all the equipment that you're unfamiliar with, by all the people who are bigger and in better shape than you, by the amount of like just sheer, I guess, like visual trauma that you're kind of taking in, where it's like, this is really hard and I don't have an education in it. I don't know where to begin. It's like, well, you should begin by getting a trainer that you trust, right? Because they're going to ease that process. They're going to step you through it one by one. And if it's a good trainer, what they're not going to do is tell you what to do, but instead they're going to demonstrate why you're doing what you're doing with a bigger picture in mind. That way you'll eventually be able to break off from them being your crutch, and you'll be able to start to do this on your own. You'll start to develop your own game plan, I guess, moving forward.
That's so good. So thinking about, all the play that you do, and I know you do some tournaments, you do a lot of cash, you're kind of you do both of those things, and I know the games that you play are bigger games than a lot of us are playing, but as you look at the situations that you're involved with as you're playing the game, like what are those mistakes that you're seeing less experienced players making on a regular basis? Like the things that they do that you can immediately say, oh, they're less experienced, or those things that just keep coming up where you're like, that's such an unprofitable play, or something that's super exploitable. What are those things that you see most common?
It's two things. First and foremost, the biggest issue that everybody at this game has, from amateur all the way to pro, is a lack of purpose. And that just speaks back to like what we were talking about, defining your objective and trying to create a strategy around it. Too many people are just reacting. They don't have foresight to understand that the deck is fixed. There are set a number of cards in there, and you can anticipate what those turns and rivers are going to be before they come. So you shouldn't be caught off guard when the ace of spades rolls off on the turn just because it feels like it's the worst card in the deck. You should already have a predetermined reaction to the quote-unquote worst card in the deck falling, because you understand that it's helping your opponent. Let me rephrase that. You should understand that if it's the worst card in the deck, it's because it helps your opponent, not just because it hurts you. Right? So when you have kings, sure, the ace on the turn is a bad card because it hurts you, but does it actually help your opponent? Right? And if you start to think logically about it like that, now all of a sudden fear is kind of reduced. And that's really the framework in which the vast majority of the people are playing this game, because there's money involved. Fear drives decisions. And we talk a lot about this in our online courses, the idea of fight or flight, and how imprecise people are at making high-level decisions when thrust into a fight or flight stage.
Right.
What a lot of people don't understand is fight or flight is actually driven by our limbic system, which is what controls our emotions as well. So it's really difficult to make logical choices when your emotional brain is what's being engaged.
Your amygdala is firing at 100 miles an hour.
Right. And the idea is that the reason why our brain's set up this way is because when actually presented a life or death situation, you don't need to make a logical choice.
Right.
You need to make the most readily available choice that will keep you alive. But the problem is that the environment of poker creates that sort of chaos that emulates a life or death situation because we put such high value on money. And the reality is, like, you're not in a life or death situation at all. And we all know that feeling, how relieving it feels to go broke.
And I will admit, I've been in tournament situations where a situation comes up and it feels the same as the emotion I had in Rwanda when an elephant was chasing us.
Sure.
It is.
Right.
It's exactly what you're talking about. It's that feeling like, oh my God, I got to do something. I'm almost dead here. Yeah.
Yeah. And the relief you feel when you escape the elephant is the same relief you feel, even though there's a sadness attached to it. It's the same relief you feel whenever you bust an event.
So true.
Right? It's like, God, short stacking that event was way more stressful than the sadness that I feel after having just busted now. So, I'm of the opinion that, like, we can program this, we can train it, we can help re-engage our logical conscious mind to prevent shifting into fight or flight. Because again, it is an emotional response, right? So we're the ones that get to dictate and filter what we identify as a threat. And if we can recondition our fear response to be, more courageous and recognize that, like, turn and river cards aren't going to do anything to impact our life, then all of a sudden, like, we start to make a lot more logical decisions. We're a lot more sound in these situations, and that's really key to mistake removal.
So how do you see that kind of manifest itself at the table? And you're saying, I feel like less experienced people have a sense of or lack a sense of purpose. They sort of haven't reconditioned their fear factor. How do you see that sort of manifest itself in situations as you're playing?
Bluff catching. And it's so ironic because the environment as a whole, especially at the levels that your listeners are playing at, are under bluffing at such a massive rate that the idea of check calling for more than one street profitably is almost non-existent. You could, as a very quick Band-Aid fix, right here, right now on air, you could probably never check call the river again with less than a top 3 qualifying hand, and you would make money just by simply check folding rivers at a way higher rate. You would immediately begin to print money because what happens is the whole environment is doing the same thing. Everybody is taking on this risk-averse style, and what it's leading to is that when people actually bet, they just have it, and when people are checking, they have just enough to check call. So a lot of hands that are way more incentivized to keep initiative and force their opponents to react with are actually shifting into check calls, and what it's allowing for is everybody's realizing the fullest amount of their equity. So what I mean by that is anytime 2 hands enter a pot, each of them have an equity split in this pot. So if you have an overpair and they have 6 high, well, they're not drawing dead. We've seen this time and time again, like runner is a thing, et cetera, et cetera. So, like, let's say somebody has 5-6 high and you have pocket kings and the board is jack deuce 7. Well, you might be a roughly 90% favorite here. But if you're just always checking to call, what will happen is the 6 high will very rarely bluff and just check and check. And the 10% of the time that they actually make the best hand, you pay them off to the fullest.
Right.
But you don't earn any money the 90% of the time that they have nothing. Right. Now change this to you have ace king high and they have 6 high. Well, you're still like a 70% favorite. But again, if you're just checking to check call because you have what you feel to be a bluff catcher and they're not bluffing with their 6 high, well, they're just realizing their 30% over and over and over again. And then every time that they get there, you're paying, or you're paying some percentage of the time that they get there. So this passive idea of, like, I'm going to play my hands as bluff catchers when the environment itself is just not bluffing very often, leads to a lot of lost value and a lot of mistakes.
Okay, well, that's it for today. Thanks so much to Matt for taking the time. A reminder, we will have part 2 of the interview next week. So hold your horses. You'll hear more from Matt next week. Also, again, thank you to Running Aces for sponsoring the program. Make sure you tell other people about us. If you want a patch, let me know. If you have feedback, ideas for topics, hand situations you want to run through, please let me know. We do have a number of great interviews coming up over the next several weeks. We're going to be also hearing from, besides Matt Berkey, you'll hear from Jonathan Little, Dr. Tricia Cardner, Jordan Young, Christian Soto, a number of folks that we have lined up. So stay tuned for those things. And as always, reach out to me on Facebook, Twitter, email, stevefredland@gmail.com if you got anything you want to chat about regarding rec poker. With that, take care, y'all. See you on the felt.